Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We're going to jump into the second segment here, but before I do that, a reminder to you guys, if you have any questions or comments you want to make during today's live show, to please use the tip and donations link you see on your screen, GSMCPodcast.net. By using that link, I can see your question pop up right away on my screen, and then I can read it on air and just get your guys' perspective on anything I say or anything on the topic that we're talking about. It's a lot more engaging that way, and it's a massive help for this show as well as all the other shows across the network. So again, if you would, please use the tip and donations link, GSMCPodcast.net. It would be greatly appreciated by me as well as everybody else across the network. But like I mentioned, the second topic we're going to talk about is the Kansas City Chiefs, what they have in store. They have the opening game of the NFL season on that Thursday. I don't recall the exact date, but they are the reigning Super Bowl champions, so they will host the home opener on that Thursday. Then the Eagles play the Packers in Brazil on that Friday, so a very monumental first weekend, I guess I should say, of the NFL season. But the Chiefs will open it up, and there are a few options that they can decide on. The NFL has announced the opponent of each team, but no schedule, no exact date, or the order of which they will play these teams in. However, the NFL has said that the schedule release is coming at some point in this month in May. Usually they wait around the second week of May. That's usually been the common time period where they release it. So if it's not, I don't think it'll be this week, but probably next weekend, if not the following, I would expect the official release of the order of each of the opponents that these teams play. But for now, we could speculate, and I could give you guys my rankings on who I believe could be that first opponent for the Kansas City Chiefs, who I would like to see, and just the best options in my opinion. As a reminder, the Kansas City Chiefs have 8 opponents to choose from for their first game, 8 opponents that will travel to Kansas City. It could be the Broncos, the Chargers, or the Raiders, of course, in their division. Then their out-of-division opponents are the Texans, Ravens, Bengals, Buccaneers, and the New Orleans Saints. One of these 8 teams will be the home opening game against the Kansas City Chiefs. So I brought you guys my rankings here today. Then I will start with the unlikely section of my rankings, just the teams that it is a long shot for me, in my opinion, for the NFL to choose from these teams. You know, the first night, everyone's excited to come in, watch the Chiefs play whoever. Last season, it was the Lions, and that might have surprised a good amount of people, but it worked out in the best because the Lions had a great season. They surprised everybody by beating the Kansas City Chiefs, so that was a good matchup last season to sort of introduce everybody to this new Detroit Lions team, young and exciting. It brings that it factor, that must-see sort of atmosphere. And not to say that nobody wants to watch the Saints, the Buccaneers, or the Broncos, but the Saints and the Broncos really are still trying to figure a lot of things out about their roster. The Buccaneers would probably be the best option out of these 3, but at the same time, they're not looked upon as one of the premier teams, not even in the NFL, but not even really in their conference. They made the playoffs last season. They played the Lions, but I feel like they never really convinced a lot of people in their roster. Right now, they re-signed Baker Mayfield. They brought back Mike Evans, so it is a positive from that standpoint, but there's nothing that really excites too many people about this game too much. At least that's my opinion. So these are the 3 that I have deemed as the unlikely teams that I would be really surprised if the NFL went with any of these teams. But moving on to the next category I have here, the not bad category of the opponents I wouldn't mind seeing there on opening night. Really the 2, the Chargers and the Raiders. I'll start with the Raiders. The sort of animosity, the back and forth, the chirping, the late hits potentially, all the extra stuff that you see and what I think a lot of fans enjoy seeing. the extracurricular, the emotion of the games really showed out to me when I watched the Raiders and the Chiefs play. The Raiders obviously coming off of that massive win that they had on Christmas against the Chiefs in Kansas City. So going back there again, now with a much improved team. Of course, they still have the quarterback situation that they have to figure out. That could really knock it down a tier or could be what derails their bid to be the home opening opponent. But other than that, they added Christian Wilkins to that defense to pair up with Max Crosby. We all remember the interaction Max Crosby and Patrick Mahomes had in one of their games. There's that back and forth. You add on Christian Wilkins, another player that loves to trash talk on top of it all. I think it would make for great television. Antonio Pierce now has full reins of the Raiders. Not the quarterback ideally that they want, but they brought in Brock Bowers, that tight end matchup there with Travis Kelce. I think it would draw a lot of eyes. Antonio Pierce's comments as well. I almost forgot about Patrick Mahomes and sort of installing these Patrick Mahomes rules like the Michael Jordan rules back in the day against the Bad Boy Pistons. All of that, all those things I just named out are extracurricular stuff outside of the actual game of football. So it would draw a lot more people in. I don't think that's a bad suggestion. As well as the Chargers, you have Jim Harbaugh coming back. How are the Chargers going to look now? They brought in Joe Alt. They drafted Ladd McConkey. They brought in, it's going to look very different on the offensive side of the ball. Plus the defensive line, offensive line mindset that the Chargers want to install. How does that play out? How does Jim Harbaugh do in his return to the NFL? Plus, you get the matchup, Herbert versus Mahomes. It never really disappoints. So, unlike the Raiders, the Chargers have the quarterback matchup that a lot of people would want to see. But the team aspect, I think the Raiders might have a more complete, more star-filled team at this point. But either one, you get one with one team and you get the other thing with the Chargers. So either one of them, I wouldn't be upset seeing them play the Kansas City Chiefs on opening night. And then lastly here, my last category I have for the opponents is the must-see, can't-miss-it section here with the final three teams I mentioned before. The Houston Texans, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the Baltimore Ravens. I'll start with the Texans. Similarly to the Detroit Lions last year, what better way to introduce everybody to this new, up-and-coming, young team that got better, a lot better, since 4 or 5 years ago to where they are now to play the reigning Super Bowl champions in Kansas City. You have C.J. Stroud, Joe Mixon, Stephon Diggs coming over, how he has all his history with the Kansas City Chiefs, Tank Dell, I'm blanking, Nico Collins as well. All of these star power that the Texans have. A young quarterback like C.J. Stroud coming off of the season that he had against Patrick Mahomes now. I don't think you could go wrong at all with picking the Texans. And then you move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow coming back after being injured for most of the season last year, or at least to close it out. The rivalry that both of them have with each other, especially in the playoffs. Joe Burrow, of course, the only quarterback to beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs other than Tom Brady. How they reignite that rivalry there. It always gets chippy between these two teams with Jamar Chase and the Kansas City Chiefs defense. It would be must-see TV. The star power will definitely not be lacking, so that wouldn't be a bad option as well. And then you have the Baltimore Ravens, AFC Championship rematch, this time in Kansas City. Mahomes versus Lamar Jackson. Again, not lacking any star power. And originally, I had the Cincinnati Bengals as my pick, that if I had to choose out of one of these 8 teams, I originally was going to say the Bengals, just for all their history that they have. But right now, I think I'm going to change it to the Houston Texans as the team I would love to see them play in that first week, just because I think it's too similar to the Detroit Lions last year. You introduce this team, a lot of people who don't really follow too much football and might not know how much better the Houston Texans have gotten over this period of bringing in DeMeco Ryans, drafting C.J. Stroud, that massive trade they made with the Cleveland Browns to really fill out this entire roster that they have, how drastically they've turned this team around. I think It's a great way to introduce not only this team and how great they could be in the AFC if, say, they beat the Kansas City Chiefs on opening night. Then you get a lot of people's attention and you are start to be taken seriously by everybody around the NFL. I think that would be very beneficial. Plus, you get a peek at a future quarterback duel. CJ Stroud coming into his second year, taking on the best quarterback of this generation, Patrick Mahomes. Say he outplays him or just his team wins and he makes a couple of great plays. Again, you have CJ Stroud being taken a lot more serious and a lot more people looking at this Houston Texans team very differently if they go into Kansas City and defeat the Chiefs on opening night. So ideally, that's what I would love to see. I've been high on the Texans all off season with how they've rebuilt, the free agency signings that they've made, and coming off of the draft as well. I think they've hit a home run this offseason, and I would love to see them test themselves against the Kansas City Chiefs on opening night. But that is my list. Those are my rankings on who I would love to see the Chiefs play. Again, if you guys agree, disagree with me, leave it in the comments or in the chat section of this live show. Did I miss out on some teams? Did I get the order wrong? Let me know what you guys think in the comments or in the chat box. But anyway, moving on to another break on today's episode. But after that, we will touch on that topic I mentioned on Kirk Cousins and why he ultimately decided to move on from the Minnesota Vikings and how, ironically, his problem chased them all the way down to Atlanta. Plus, more on the Vikings keeping up with the topic now with their new quarterback, J.J. McCarthy, what his initial thoughts were on the whole draft process and which team he wanted to get drafted to all along will be coming up on today's show. So don't go anywhere. More stories coming up right after this break.